Well, I think that's a real bad question. I don't think there's any doubt. I'd like to be out there this afternoon pitching. There's nothing I'd like to do better in the world than to play baseball, and I'd like to go back right now.
Finally revealed, the terrible moment that seemed to end Herb Score's greatness did not tell the full story. It happened on May 7, 1957, at Cleveland Municipal Stadium. Yankee hitter Gil McDougald lined a fastball straight back into Herb Score's right eye. Blood poured down his face. For decades, people believed that single moment ended his career, but it did not. Score's eye healed to perfect 20/20 vision. The real turning point came a year later, deep inside his pitching elbow. I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. So why did some of the greatest hitters who ever lived speak about Herb Score with such respect? Why did Ted Williams call him the fastest lefty he ever faced? Why did Mickey Mantle say he simply could not hit him? Why did Yogi Berra, a man who could hit almost anything thrown near the plate, name Score as the single toughest pitcher he ever stepped in against? These were not casual compliments handed out by ordinary players. These were words from some of the most accomplished hitters the sport has ever produced. As we uncover why baseball's biggest stars praised Herb, use the hype feature and give this video some hype so more fans can hear his story. Before we get to that terrifying night, and before we get to the legends who feared his fastball, we need to go back to the very beginning, because Herb Score's whole life was a story of getting knocked down and getting back up. Herbert Jude Score was born on June 7, 1933, in Rosedale, Queens, New York. His mother was named Anne. His father, Herbert A. Score, worked as a New York City police officer, directing traffic in Manhattan. From the time he was a small child, life tested him again and again. When he was only 3 years old, a truck ran him over. Both of his legs were fractured near the pelvis. Doctors were afraid he might never walk normally again. There was no surgery available that could fix it. His bones simply had to heal on their own, and slowly, they moved back into place. Think about that for a moment. A 3-year-old boy, badly hurt, with doctors unsure if he would ever walk the same way again. That kind of news would frighten any family. But somehow, without any operation at all, his young body found its own way to mend. A few years later, young Herb caught rheumatic fever. This illness kept him completely still in bed for 10 months. He could not run. He could not play. He could only wait and heal. For a boy who loved sports, lying still for 10 straight months must have felt like its own kind of punishment, yet he came through it. Then, as a freshman in high school, he broke his ankle playing basketball. While his leg sat in a heavy plaster cast, doctors discovered he also needed emergency surgery to remove his appendix. 2 serious medical events happened almost at the same time, the stacking one hardship directly on top of another. Through all of this, his mother held onto her Catholic faith. She had prayed to St. Jude during a difficult pregnancy, and she gave her son the middle name Jude in his honor. St. Jude is known as the patron saint of lost causes and desperate situations, the saint people turn to when a problem feels too big to solve. Herb and his mother both believed that prayer carried him through his hardest moments. This early pattern of getting hurt and coming back stronger became the foundation of who Herb Score was. Long before he ever stepped onto a professional pitching mound, his body and his spirit had already learned how to survive. It explains the calm strength he would show later in life when the entire baseball world was watching him suffer in public. A person who has already survived a truck accident, a long illness, and a broken ankle learns something that most people never have to learn. He learns that pain can pass, and that healing is possible even when it does not feel possible at the time. After his parents separated, Herb moved with his mother to Lake Worth, Florida. It was there that the world first saw his talent. Pitching for Lake Worth Community High School, he threw 6 no-hitters. He led his school to its only state championship. He struck out hitters at an incredible rate, close to 2 strikeouts every inning, though his control was still rough around the edges. In one unforgettable 1952 game against Fort Pierce, Score threw a no-hitter, striking out 14 batters while walking 9 in a wild 5-1 win. Nobody managed to get a single hit off him that day, even though he was not always sure exactly where the ball was going. That mix of dominant, overpowering stuff and youthful wildness would become his calling card for years to come. Hitters simply could not touch him, even when he could not always find the strike zone. That combination, blazing speed paired with a bit of wildness, would follow him for years to come. It made him exciting to watch, and it made him frightening to face, because a hitter never quite knew where the next pitch would end up. On his 19th birthday in 1952, Cleveland Indians scout Cy Slapnicka signed Herb Score to a professional contract. This was the same scout who had discovered Bob Feller, one of the greatest fastball pitchers in baseball history. Cleveland paid Score a signing bonus of $60,000, a massive sum for a teenager at that time. It showed how much the team believed in him. The same scout who had once found the great Bob Feller was now telling the Cleveland front office that he had found another arm just as special. That kind of comparison, made before Score had even thrown a single professional pitch, tells you exactly how highly the organization regarded him from day one. Score was sent to the minor leagues in Reading, Pennsylvania. There, he roomed with a young outfielder named Rocky Colavito, who would go on to become a home run champion. The two of them became lifelong friends. While many players around them lived hard and drank hard, Score and Colavito chose a different path. They avoided alcohol completely and focused on staying in top physical shape. Even as very young men, far from home and playing in a rough, hard-living era of baseball, they understood that discipline off the field would help them succeed on it. That kind of quiet self-control says a great deal about the kind of person Herb Score already was, long before he became a star. At Reading, Score posted a 7-3 record. He allowed just 64 hits in 98 innings, but he also walked 126 batters, a sign of his raw and untamed power. In plain terms, this meant hitters almost never got a clean hit off him, but he also had not yet learned to control exactly where the ball went. That kind of overwhelming, unpredictable speed is part of what made him so hard to prepare for. Then, disaster struck again. While chasing a fly ball in practice, he crashed hard into the ground and separated his collarbone. His season ended early. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, Score used the recovery time wisely. He finished the coursework needed to earn his high school diploma. In 1954, Cleveland promoted Score to AAA Indianapolis, one step below the major leagues. This was his last stop before the big leagues, and everyone in the organization was watching closely to see if he was finally ready. Manager Kirby Farrell guided the young pitcher, and pitching coach Ted Wilkes helped him sharpen his curveball, his changeup, and his overall mechanics. Teammates who watched Score during this period, including catcher Hank Foyles, gave much of the credit for his rapid improvement to the patient coaching he received from Wilkes that season. Raw power alone was no longer enough. Score was now learning how to truly pitch, not just throw. The results were stunning. Score finished the season with a 22-5 record and a tiny 2.62 earned run average. He completed 21 of his 32 starts. He struck out 330 batters in just 251 innings, breaking a league strikeout record that had stood for 48 years. He was named the league's most valuable player and was honored as the Sporting News Minor League Player of the Year. To put those numbers in simple terms, striking out 330 batters in only 251 innings meant he was averaging well over a strikeout every single inning, an almost unheard of pace for that era. Cleveland fans began to whisper that they had found their next great ace, a true left-handed answer to Bob Feller himself. No one could promise Score would reach the Hall of Fame, but the hopes riding on this young pitcher's shoulders were enormous. Everyone in the organization, from the front office down to the fans in the stands, believed they were watching the beginning of something historic. Herb Score's major league debut came on April 15, 1955, against the Detroit Tigers. He threw a complete game, striking out 9 batters and won 2-1. For a young pitcher stepping onto a major league mound for the very first time, tossing a complete game victory right out of the gate was an incredible first impression, and it told the entire league that the hype surrounding him had been earned. Cleveland's pitching staff at that time was one of the best in baseball, built around veterans Bob Feller, Bob Lemon, Early Wynn, and Mike Garcia. Adding young Herb Score to that group felt like adding lightning to a team that already had thunder. Fans and sports writers across the country started paying close attention, wondering just how good this rookie left-hander could become. The most famous moment of that rookie season arrived on May 1st, 1955, during a Sunday doubleheader against the Boston Red Sox at Cleveland Stadium. In the first game, 36-year-old Bob Feller threw the 12th and final one-hitter of his legendary career, shutting out Boston 2-0. He faced only 29 batters all game. As Feller's teammates celebrated in the clubhouse, young Score sat quietly at his locker, getting ready to pitch the second game. He turned to the players nearby and said, "This is going to be great, me coming in after that performance." Feller overheard him and told reporters, "It's going to be a tough act for the kid to follow." Catcher Jim Hegan encouraged Score to simply go out and do even better. Score answered the challenge. He struck out 9 Red Sox hitters in just the first 3 innings. By the end of the game, he had 16 strikeouts, just 2 short of Feller's own major league record. He won the game 2-1. Pitching coach Mel Harder had recently fixed a flaw in how Score gripped his curveball, and the improvement showed immediately. Despite the historic outing, Score stayed humble afterward, saying he believed a one-hitter like Fellers was actually better pitching than a game full of strikeouts. That kind of humility, deflecting praise away from himself and toward a veteran teammate, was typical of how Score carried himself throughout his career, both on the mound and later behind the microphone. Manager Al Lopez told reporters that Score already had an excellent curveball and warned that he was only going to get faster. That single afternoon, watching the veteran ace and the rookie fireballer dominate back-to-back felt like watching a torch pass from one great Cleveland pitcher to the next. Two different pitchers, one experienced and one still learning, had shown the entire league two different ways to be nearly unhittable in the very same day. Score finished his rookie year with a 16-10 record, a 2.85 ERA, and a league-leading 245 strikeouts. Leading the entire league in strikeouts as a rookie was almost unheard of at the time, especially in an era filled with established veteran pitchers. That rookie strikeout record stood for 29 years, until Dwight Gooden broke it in 1984, which shows just how far ahead of his time Score really was. Score was named American League Rookie of the Year and made his first All-Star team. In 1956, he grew even better. He finished 20-9 with a 2.53 ERA and led the league again with 263 strikeouts. He allowed only 5.85 hits per 9 innings, a Cleveland team record that lasted until 1968. Left-handed batters hit a shockingly low .126 against him. In simple terms, a batting average that low means left-handed hitters were getting a clean hit off him only about once in every 8 tries, an extraordinary number for a full major league season. Pitchers dream of that kind of dominance for a single afternoon, let alone across an entire year against every left-handed hitter in the league. By the end of that season, Boston's general manager Joe Cronin offered Cleveland $1 million in cash just to acquire Score. Cleveland's general manager Hank Greenberg turned the offer down flat, later saying that if he had accepted, Cronin would have immediately called Boston's owner to get it approved. Herb Score, at only 23 years old, had become one of the most valuable arms in all of baseball. $1 million in the 1950s was an almost unimaginable sum of money for a single ball player, and it tells you exactly how rare his talent truly was. Very few players in the history of the sport, before or since, have ever had an entire team's ownership willing to pay that kind of price, just for the chance to have them on their roster. It was during these two dazzling seasons that the biggest names in the game began talking about Herb Score, and their words tell us everything we need to know about how special he really was. Number 4. Yogi Berra. The great Yankees catcher had a gift for hitting almost anything thrown near the plate, even pitches outside the strike zone. Pitchers around the league feared Berra because normal strategy simply did not work against him. Yet Berra named Score as the toughest pitcher he ever faced. Herb Score was pretty darn good before he got hurt, Berra said. Coming from a hitter who could handle almost any pitch thrown his way, that statement carried enormous weight. His respect for Score was not just about talent on the field. It went deeper than that, and it would show itself in a very personal way when tragedy struck. Number 3. Mickey Mantle. In 1994, Mantle was asked to name the greatest team he had ever seen, including the toughest pitchers he personally faced. From the National League, he chose Sandy Koufax. From the American League, his choice was Herb Score, and he added one important phrase, before he got hurt. Mantle was often quoted saying, "Herb Score is the toughest pitcher I've faced. I just can't hit him." Baseball records actually show that Mantle hit a solid .250 against Score with an .859 OPS and 2 home runs. Numbers that prove Mantle could handle him at times. But that does not take anything away from what Mantle said nearly 40 years later. Fear on a baseball field does not always show up in the box score. Sometimes it shows up in how a hitter remembers walking to the plate, in the pressure he felt standing 60 feet away from a pitch he could barely see coming. That kind of memory, carried for decades by one of the greatest hitters ever to play the game, says more about Score's talent than any statistic could. Number 2. Ted Williams. Many baseball historians consider Williams the most scientific hitter the game has ever known. He was not an easy man to impress. Yet Williams said that Score was on his way to being a great pitcher, and he privately told people that Score was the fastest left-handed pitcher he had ever faced. On June 19, 1955, at Fenway Park, Score struck Williams out in the first inning using nothing but pure high-velocity fastballs. Williams walked back to the dugout and told his teammates, "If he throws me that pitch I struck out on again, I'll hit one today." Sure enough, in the fifth inning, Williams crushed a 430-foot home run into the center field bleachers. It was not an insult to Score. It was one great competitor recognizing another. Williams respected the way Score's fastball moved with such power and life that it could disrupt even the finest hitting eye in baseball. Getting struck out by Score in the first inning and then hitting a long home run off him in the fifth was not a contradiction. It was proof that facing Score meant every single pitch was its own separate battle, one that even the greatest hitter of his generation had to fight for. Number 1. Bob Feller. Feller was the pitcher Score had been compared to since the day he signed his first contract, and it was Feller himself, on that unforgettable doubleheader afternoon, who set the stage for Score's breakout performance by throwing a masterpiece and then handing the moment to a 21-year-old rookie. Feller's simple prediction that it would be a tough act to follow, and Score's answer on the mound minutes later, captured the changing of the guard in Cleveland. The torch had passed from one of baseball's fastest arms to the next. Feller had spent his career being called the fastest pitcher of his generation, and by handing that same kind of praise, even quietly, to a rookie, he was telling the entire baseball world to pay close attention to what was coming next. Other respected voices in the game felt the same admiration. Cardinals legend Stan Musial, one of the most respected hitters of his generation, sent Score a heartfelt letter after his darkest night on the mound, telling him how sorry he was and wishing him a full and speedy recovery. A gesture like that, coming from a rival star with no reason to reach out except genuine concern, shows just how far Score's reputation had spread across the entire sport. Longtime broadcast partner Joe Tate later called Score the smartest baseball man he had ever met. Former teammate Buddy Bell joked that Score was such a kind and polite person that he probably made his own hotel bed every morning. These were not small compliments. They came from men who had spent their lives around the toughest competitors in the sport, men who did not hand out praise easily. Now we return to the night everything appeared to change. It was May 7th, 1957. The Cleveland Indians were facing the New York Yankees at Municipal Stadium, and Yankee right-hander Tom Sturdivant was on the mound for New York. Score had been pitching brilliantly since his rookie year, and the crowd that night expected another dominant outing from Cleveland's young ace. Nobody in the stadium had any idea that within the very first inning, the entire course of his career would change forever. Herb Score's pitching motion was violent and explosive. He drove hard off the mound with a deep, sweeping follow-through. His head dropped low as he released the ball, and his body swung completely out of position. He actually wore a basketball knee pad on his right knee because his own elbow slammed into it during every single pitch. Score later admitted that he sometimes could not even see where his own pitches ended up. He had to turn and look for the ball after it was hit. It was an incredibly effective way to generate speed, but it also left him almost completely defenseless the moment the ball left his hand. A pitcher with a calmer, more controlled motion can often react to a ball hit right back at him. Score, mid-fall and off balance from his own violent motion, simply could not. Hank Bauer led off the game for New York. With one out, Gil McDougald stepped up to the plate. The count reached 2 balls and 2 strikes. Score threw a low fastball. McDougald swung and sent a screaming line drive straight back at the mound. Score had no time to react or protect himself. The ball struck him directly in the right eye. It fractured the bones of his face, shattered his nose, and cut his eyelid open. It happened so fast that Score had no chance to duck or turn away. The ball bounced away toward third baseman Al Smith, who somehow kept his composure and calmly threw McDougald out at first base before rushing toward his fallen teammate. Around the stadium, thousands of fans fell into a stunned, uncertain silence, unsure of exactly what they had just watched happen on the field. McDougald did not even run to first base. He sprinted straight to the mound. First baseman Vic Wertz ran over too, but the moment he saw the injury, his shoulders dropped and he had to turn away. Score lay curled on the mound, blood pouring from his eye, nose, and mouth, but he stayed fully conscious the entire time. As they carried him off on a stretcher, he whispered, "St. Jude, stay with me," calling on the very saint his mother had prayed to years before. In the clubhouse, he asked the team doctor a simple, terrified question: "Do I still have an eye?" And yet, even in that much pain, Score's sense of humor never left him. He told teammate Mike Garcia, "They can't say I didn't keep my eye on that one." When a reporter said he would visit him in the hospital, Score joked, "I hope I can see you." Referencing a recent boxing match, he said he probably looked like fighter Gene Fullmer did after getting hit by Sugar Ray Robinson. It takes a very particular kind of strength to crack jokes while lying injured on a pitching mound, blood covering your own face, not knowing whether you will ever see clearly again. That strength was not something Score suddenly discovered that night. It was the same quiet toughness he had been building since he was a small boy recovering from a truck accident. Doctors at Lakeside Hospital, led by eye specialist Charles Thomas, spent 8 days keeping both of Score's eyes completely bandaged in total darkness, protecting the injured nerve from any further strain. Dr. Thomas eventually explained the reason the eye survived at all. Because the ball hit him so directly, the bones around his eye, his brow, his cheek, and his nose had absorbed most of the force that would have otherwise destroyed his sight completely. In a strange way, the very violence of the impact, spreading across so much of his face at once, may have actually protected the delicate eyeball underneath. Lying in the dark for 8 straight days, unable to see anything at all, unsure whether his career or even his sight would ever return, would have broken the spirit of almost anyone. Yet those close to him say Score stayed remarkably calm throughout the ordeal, leaning once again on the same quiet faith that had carried him through every hardship before. Gil McDougald was devastated. He had not done anything wrong. He had simply hit a baseball hard, exactly the way he was supposed to. Yet the guilt sat on him like a heavy weight. Sitting alone in the Yankees clubhouse, he told Hank Bauer that if Score lost his sight, he would quit baseball entirely, saying the game was not important enough to matter compared to that. McDougald, Bauer, and Yogi Berra all tried to visit Score at the hospital that same night, but staff turned them away. As soon as he could, Score sent word to McDougald through Cleveland executive Hank Greenberg. "Please tell Gil that I don't blame him for what happened," Score said. "It's part of the game, that's all." Those words, coming from a man lying in a hospital bed with his eye still bandaged, tell you almost everything you need to know about his character. He was not thinking about revenge or blame. He was thinking about easing the pain of a teammate who had done nothing more than swing a bat the way the game required. Even Score's own mother reached out personally to comfort McDougald. Yankees manager Casey Stengel refused to pull McDougald from the lineup in the days that followed, believing that stepping away from the game would only let fear take root. Stengel compared it to a rider who falls off a horse. That rider needs to climb back on right away, or the fear only grows stronger. Just 5 days after the accident, on May 12th, McDougald faced Baltimore pitcher Hal Brown. McDougald hit another hard line drive, one that flew so close to Brown's head that it knocked his cap off. McDougald later said he could see the fear on Brown's face, and he admitted he understood exactly how that felt. From that day forward, McDougald privately stayed uneasy about hitting line drives back up the middle for the rest of his own playing career. Here is where the popular version of Herb Score's story gets it wrong. Many people believe that terrible eye injury alone ended his career. It did not. His vision fully recovered to a perfect 20/20, exactly the way it had been before the accident. He came back to pitch in 1958 with the same blazing fastball and the same aggressive style that had made him famous. There was no fear in his delivery, and there was no hesitation in the way he attacked hitters. He looked completely like his old self, capped off by a 3-hit, 13-strikeout shutout against the Chicago White Sox on April 23rd. If the story had ended there, Herb Score would likely be remembered today as one of the greatest left-handed pitchers who ever lived. But the real disaster was still ahead of him, and it had nothing at all to do with his eye. On a cold, rainy night in Washington, D.C., during the early weeks of that 1958 season, Score felt a dull, nagging pain building in his elbow and forearm as he pitched. He tried to push through it, but soon his pitches simply were not reaching home plate the way they used to. Specialists in Baltimore examined him and discovered he had torn a tendon in his pitching elbow, a small but critical piece of tissue that helps a pitcher's arm snap forward with speed and control. He rested for 3 weeks, hoping the tendon would heal enough for him to keep pitching at his old level, and then returned as a relief pitcher. He struck out 5 or 6 batters in that outing, but on the very last pitch of the game, a simple pop-up, he felt another violent tear in his elbow. After that pitch, Score said later, "I was never the same again. My pitches never had the same movement on them. I had no snap." To keep pitching through the pain, Score began changing his natural throwing motion without even realizing it. He was trying to protect his damaged elbow, but the new habits ruined the very thing that made him great. It is easy for anyone who has ever favored a sore arm or a sore leg to understand what happened next. When part of your body hurts, you naturally shift the way you move to avoid that pain. For most people, that small shift barely matters. For a professional pitcher whose entire career depended on a precise, repeatable motion, even a tiny change could be devastating. "The reason my motion changed was because I hurt my elbow," Score explained, "and I overcompensated for it and ended up with some bad habits. What killed me was that my ball no longer moved." It went up to home plate as straight as an arrow. A fastball with no movement is much easier for a hitter to see and to hit, no matter how fast it travels. Before the injury, Score's pitches used to dart and dip at the last moment, making them nearly impossible to square up cleanly. After the injury, that late life on the ball was simply gone, and hitters who once feared him now had a far easier time timing his pitches. The proof of how hard he was now straining his body showed up in strange, physical ways. Score once needed a fresh metal toe plate on his pitching shoe after just one single game, when before his injury, one toe plate used to last him an entire season. Doctors had also treated the swelling in his face with 10 months of cortisone shots after the eye injury, and it is possible, though not fully certain, that this long treatment affected his muscle tone as he tried to recover his old form. Score himself never made excuses about any of this. He simply described what had happened to his body and let the results speak for themselves. In 1959, he changed his motion again, hoping to find relief, but his results only grew worse. A young player named Ron Hunt later put it plainly to reporters, saying that Score no longer had his old power and was simply pushing the ball up to the plate instead of firing it. Looking back, it is worth remembering just how much stress Score had placed on his young arm. Between the ages of 21 and 24, counting both the minor leagues and the majors, he had already thrown more than 720 hard, high-effort innings. Pitchers today are protected by strict pitch counts and careful rest schedules. In Score's era, none of that existed yet. A violent, all-out delivery combined with that heavy workload created a physical strain that was simply not sustainable, no matter how much talent or determination a young pitcher had. The numbers tell the story clearly. Before his 1958 elbow injury, across 1955 through 1957, Score's record stood at 38 wins and 20 losses, with a sharp 2.64 ERA and 547 strikeouts in just over 512 innings. That kind of ERA means that, on average, opposing teams could barely score more than 2.5 runs against him over a full 9-inning game. After the injury, from 1958 through 1962, his record fell to 17 wins and 26 losses, with his ERA rising to 4.42 and his strikeouts dropping to 290 in far fewer effective innings. In plain language, the pitcher who once made hitters look helpless was now allowing nearly twice as many runs per game as before. It is one of the clearest before and after pictures in baseball history, and it points directly at the elbow, not the eye, as the true cause. In 1960, Cleveland traded Score to the Chicago White Sox for pitcher Barry Latman, reuniting him with old manager Al Lopez and former teammates like Mike Garcia and Early Wynn. It must have felt hopeful in a way to be surrounded by familiar faces again, men who remembered exactly how dominant he used to be. Even surrounded by those familiar faces, though, Score could never fully recover his old dominance. His arm simply would not let him. Score never pitched in another major league game after that outing, retiring at 29, an age when many pitchers are only beginning to reach their prime. But Herb Score's story did not end there, and this is where it becomes something truly special. In 1964, he stepped into the Cleveland broadcasting booth, calling games on television from 1964 through 1967, before moving over to the radio side in 1968. He stayed behind the microphone for 34 years, finally stepping away after Game 7 of the 1997 World Series. It remains the longest broadcasting career in Cleveland baseball history. Fans grew to love his low, calm, comforting voice. He had a gentle sense of humor and a relaxed, easygoing style, even including a few famous slips of the tongue, like the time he accidentally announced the score of the game as if it were a person's name. Those small mistakes never bothered fans. If anything, they made him feel even more like a friend sitting next to them in the room, rather than a distant celebrity behind a microphone. Buddy Bell once joked that Score was such a courteous, kind man that he probably made his own hotel bed every single morning on the road. His broadcast partner, Joe Tate, said that if he ever ran the Cleveland front office, Herb Score would be his general manager with total freedom to do whatever he wanted, calling him the smartest baseball man he had ever met. That is a remarkable statement coming from a man who spent decades sitting next to Score, night after night, listening to how he broke down the game. Tate also joked warmly that Score had probably watched more bad baseball than anyone alive, a nod to some of Cleveland's tougher seasons during their years together, seasons that Score always described with patience and good humor instead of complaint. Broadcasting gave Herb Score something his pitching arm could not. It gave him decades more time connected to the game he loved and to the fans who loved him right back. A pitching career, even a great one, only lasts so long. Score's second career in the booth lasted far longer than his playing days ever did, and it let an entire new generation of Cleveland fans get to know him, not as the pitcher who got hurt, but as the steady, trusted voice who welcomed them into every single game. Life tested Herb Score once more near the end. On October 8, 1998, driving toward Florida the night after being inducted into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, his car was struck violently by a tractor-trailer in New Philadelphia, Ohio. He suffered serious injuries to his brain, chest, and lungs, along with a fractured eye socket, broken ribs, and a broken sternum. He spent more than a month in intensive care. He spent more than a month fighting simply to survive in intensive care. True to the pattern that had defined his entire life, ever since that truck accident when he was only 3 years old, Herb Score fought his way back. By April 12, 1999, less than 6 months after the crash, he was healthy enough to walk onto the field and throw the ceremonial first pitch on opening day. Once again, a moment that should have ended everything instead quietly became another chapter in his long story of recovery. He suffered a stroke in 2002, and after a long illness, he passed away at his home in Rocky River, Ohio, on November 11, 2008, at the age of 75. The following season, the Cleveland Indians wore a special patch on their uniform sleeves to honor his memory, a quiet, lasting tribute from the only organization he had ever truly called home. For a man who had spent his entire adult life connected to Cleveland baseball, first as a pitcher and then for decades as its trusted voice, it was a fitting way for the city to say thank you. Through every single setback, the truck accident as a toddler, the rheumatic fever, the broken bones, the eye injury, the ruined elbow, and even the car crash decades later, Herb Score never let bitterness take hold. He never blamed Gil McDougald for a single moment, choosing instead to see it simply as part of the game he loved. Most people, faced with even one of those setbacks, might understandably grow angry or resentful. Score faced all of them, one after another, across an entire lifetime, and he still chose kindness every single time. He turned an interrupted pitching career into a second lifetime of service to the city of Cleveland, spending 34 years as the trusted voice fans welcomed into their homes. Bob Feller, Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, and Yogi Berra all recognized something rare in him when he stood on that mound, something few pitchers in the history of the game have ever possessed. They were not easy men to impress. They had faced hundreds of pitchers across their long careers, and yet they still chose to speak Herb Score's name with respect, decades after his fastball had already faded. That alone tells you everything you need to know about how special those few peak seasons truly were. Herb Score's story was never really about what a line drive or a torn tendon took away from him. It was about everything he kept giving back. Year after year, decade after decade, long after his fastball was gone. A 3-year-old boy who was not supposed to walk again grew into a young man who threw one of the fastest fastballs anyone had ever seen. A pitcher who lost the gift that made him famous still found a way to spend 34 more years giving his voice, his knowledge, and his kindness to the city that loved him. Herb Score endured more physical hardship than almost any athlete in baseball history, and through every single setback, he chose gratitude over bitterness, and he chose to keep showing up. That is the story worth remembering, long after the box scores have faded and long after the highlight reels have ended, a story of a man who simply refused to quit.